kind of random.
What does joining Hip Hop Now's Patreon mean? It means supporting the kind of hip-hop content that keeps you updated on the latest hip-hop news and moves. It means supporting the production of content like That Time in Hip Hop and Hip Hop Now Reviews. It means you care about the conversation and preservation of hip-hop music and culture. Hip Hop Now Patreon supporters get access to bonus content, merchandise, and more. Support the movement. Become a supporter of Hip Hop Now podcast today at patreon.com/Hip Hop Now.
Coming up on this week's episode of Hip Hop Now podcast, Royce the 5'9" says J. Cole is number one. My thoughts on Phife's posthumous album, Forever, and Freddie Gibbs versus Benny the Butcher. It's WrestleMania weekend. I'm with the smoke. Let's do it.
Let's get ready to the business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic album.
Come to Hip Hop Podcast. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast designed to keep you caught up on all things hip-hop, music, and culture that happen throughout the week. Shout out to the people who bring you, the supporters who bring you, the producers who bring you this podcast over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. You heard it in the intro, and if you missed it, the link is in the description of this episode. Back in full effect on some old school-ish, right? That's what they used to say. From Podcast Movement Evolutions Conference in Los Angeles. If you missed the last episode while I was out there for that, right? I was out there for work. Don't get too busy, but of course I bring some back to Hip Hop Now podcast. You know how it go. But while I was out there, I visited the Tupac exhibit or museum called Wake Me When I'm Free. Sort of how I feel when people send me tweets. But nevertheless, the exhibit was dope. I found that there was a lot more than I anticipated about the exhibit. So if you would like to know what I thought in full, I did a whole episode on my experience at this Tupac museum. So the link to that episode is in the description. You can listen to it after this one if you'd like, especially if you subscribe. You can listen to all of them. And also, if you would like to see a couple of photos I took from the museum, you can visit my Instagram at VegasWorldINC. Follow there also. Tell a friend. And more importantly, share this podcast with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Big shout out to hiphopdx.com, allhiphop.com, djbooth.net, and a couple of places where I'm getting some of these stories from, like in Mama's house. Let's get right into the business. So, Old Dirty Bastard is supposed to receive an official biopic via A&E. Official biopic. Now, we know, you know and I know. If you don't know who Old Dirty Bastard is, I'm not going to kill you for it. He is a part of the group Wu-Tang Clan. You should check out the series on Hulu. It's pretty dope. And it's a nice primer to you getting to know who they are. Also, you should check out the Showtime documentary they did. You watch those two, you go listen to at least that first run, right? Into the 36 Chambers, Liquid Swords, not Bring the Pain, to Cal, Only Built for Cuban Links, you know, ODB first album. Listen to those, then you come back. You be official Wu-Tang Clan fan. If you don't like any of it, why are you still here? But nevertheless, this has kind of been a long time coming. I remember there was some like leaked footage of a biopic about ODB, but looked to be starring his son. It never came out. I can't remember why it never came out. I think it was something about the production of it not being great, or something about it. But there was a couple of scenes, and I thought his son sort of had his, obviously, mannerisms down packed. Obviously, he sort of looked like him. He don't look exactly like him, but sort of did. But for whatever reason, it didn't pan out. Not sure who's going to play Old Dirty Bastard, but the dude on the Wu-Tang Saga, I don't know if he's under contract where he can appear in multiple things as the same character, but I think he does a pretty good job, right? I think he does a pretty good job of, for those that know Old Dirty Bastard, embodying his spirit. But again, that first season, he had like one-liners and it was really a few. The second season, he had more to say and he was still good. But you're talking about leading man territory, and, I'm not sure if he could do that, but you never know. I mean, it would be pretty dope. It would keep the context going as far as what happens, but I doubt they do that because the series is telling the entire story, which includes ODB, and this will be exclusively about ODB. One thing you're not going to hear about, and you're going to hear about it in 2 seconds, but you ain't going to hear about it no more than that. Just because the Fresh Prince slapped Chris Rock doesn't mean you came here to hear about it. Wasn't a hip-hop thing, right? Was not a hip-hop thing. Moving on. First of all, rest in peace to Nipsey Hussle. It was the third anniversary of his death on March 31st. Still doesn't even feel real that happened, but it did. I still listen to Nipsey music, man. I was into Nipsey music heavy, and Victory Lap is just one of those albums that will be unfortunately synonymous with his death because it dropped, maybe a couple of months before his death or whatever, and it was going to be at the Grammys and all of that. And it was just, it felt like all his hustling had sort of paid off to only have something like that happen, which is terrible. And you kind of left with that album. And that's the lasting impression you'll get unless there's a posthumous album from Nipsey somewhere that would be released. It'd be dope, but who knows? Those types of albums, sometimes they work well, sometimes they are not good. I did a whole episode, a bonus episode originally for the Patreon producers about the best posthumous albums. And trust me, there's plenty of them. So let's talk about another album. So Phife Dawg's solo album entitled Forever. It was an album that he was working on, and I think either simultaneously or after the A Tribe Called Quest album. I know he died when the Tribe Called Quest last album was released, but he was working on an album, and it's finally here. It's called Forever. It's pretty deep as far as tracks. It's not one of those albums that's so flooded with guest appearances, you just know it wasn't complete. It definitely sounds like it was either finished or really, really, really close to being finished. You could tell it's not a patchwork thing where they're pulling verses from all over the place. You could tell, this is what Phife was working on. And I like it. I think I can't say. Well, let me put a disclaimer out there. A Tribe Called Quest is one of my favorite groups of all time, right? If I had to name a top 5, they are definitely in my top 5 favorite groups of all time. And when Phife and Q-Tip decided to do solo albums, and I'm talking about their first albums, I think Phife's solo was Ventilation and Q-Tip's was Qualified, something like that. I can't remember. Both were trash. Let's just say that. Both were trash. Both were very forgettable, except for Q-Tip's Vibrant thing, right? The only thing that kind of survived that album. But regardless of that, it was always awkward for me as a big fan of the group to not hear them together because they were so good together. So when I hear Q-Tip's voice, I expect to hear Phife's voice and vice versa. On this album, I feel that way, even though the majority of the music is good. I will say this, the production is really good, like really good. Like if you just like Phife and you're not like me, like there's no block, like, yo, I don't need to hear Tribe Called Quest. I could take Phife as is. I think you'll really, really like this album. It exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways. I didn't expect it to be whack, but Ventilation was not good to me. And I think I started to realize, well, maybe I just don't like Phife solo. And it's better than I thought. The only thing, if I was to knock it, considering it was something current that he was making, and this isn't, verses being dug up from the early to mid 90s that he had. And I noticed there are a couple old school artists from the 90s that do this, and I think it's always a mistake. Now, obviously, Phife is no longer here with us. Who knows what he would have changed? So, of course, he gets a pass. But let's play pretend on what he was creating. I don't know. Maybe he thought he was done. The references to things that are old school. Now, I'm old enough to get all of them, right? So, I know some people my age or even a little bit younger would be like, well, so what? But I always felt like a rapper's job was to always be current. Sure, you can say some things from the past, but the only way to relate to not just the old people, but to everyone is to make sure you have current references. And I don't mean references for 2022. I just mean current enough that everyone gets it. You know what I'm saying? Like you can go 5, maybe 10 years back with your references and most people will get it. But when you're talking about things and bringing up things from a time where, maybe that department store is gone or that cartoon was on years ago and it doesn't even have reruns currently on the air. Currently, on the air, on TV or whatever. It stands out. And it doesn't sound good to me. It always it makes this new material sound dated to me sometimes. And there are a couple of rappers that do that, but they don't spit it from a historical perspective, right? They just kind of say it as if it's something like you should get. And if you weren't born in that time, but you like A Tribe Called Quest, you like Phife Dawg, some of them bars you're going to have to Google. And maybe they still won't make sense because you don't have the context. But nevertheless, that is the one thing that I felt was like, Overall, I felt the album was good. So again, if you're a Tribe Called Quest fan, if you're a Phife fan, if you like the first album, you'll really like this album. If you are the opposite of everything I just said, don't even press play because it's everything you don't like. All right? Bars. So J. Cole and Dreamville dropped a quote-unquote surprised album called DDay, a Gangsta Grillz mixtape, which featured, obviously the Dreamville camp led by J. Cole, a couple of other features on there like 2 Chainz and ASAP Ferg. And I did give it one listen. So this isn't a review. It's more of an impressions type thing. And my impression was one was enough. Now, that's not to say it was whack. I know we live in a time where cats feel like, if you don't like it, you don't get it. Or it's hot because it's new, right? Because people get excited, especially when they don't know an album's coming. They're so excited for it that they dig everything because it's like this surprise gift. But those projects always die a slow death if they aren't basically good. I don't feel like this album is that strong, but nevertheless, I've kind of felt that way about a couple of Dreamville compilations. I felt the last compilation was much stronger than this, whereas this one, I think it has some cuts that are predictable, some cuts that aren't really good based off of performances by some artists, some songs that are really dope. J. Cole is flawless on here, so can't call him whack. Earth Gang do what they do. The dude Kaz is dope. Like, there are some redeemable joints on here for sure. But maybe it's just the way the playlist lines up. Maybe there's some records that could have been better. But I wasn't really excited when I heard it until I got to maybe the second half of the project, and I was like, okay, now this is what I'm talking about. And no, this isn't he didn't really like the trap beats in the beginning, so when the boom bap came on, he got excited. No, I typically like those types of beats and those types of songs. I just felt the performances were uninteresting. So my attention was like, ooh, I'm about to hit that skip button, Playboy, because I ain't got a lot of time. So nevertheless, I will say this. If you like Dreamville and you mess with most of the people in the crew, especially if you liked the previous compilation or compilations, the previous compilations, I'd say it's worth your time to at least check it out if you have like a streaming service. I'm not telling you to buy it. That's on you if you want to go that far. But my impression was just kind of a meh and move on type deal. Speaking of J. Cole, Royce the 5'9" tweeted and then posted it on Instagram that because of J. Cole's drive with Dreamville and the music they put out and the compilation and the energy and all that good stuff and the popularity and maybe the sales too, that J. Cole was the number one rapper for that reason. And he specifically alluded to the debate of who's better, J. Cole, right? Drake, or Kendrick Lamar. You know what I really like about that debate? And I think it sounds like a bonus episode. Is the fact that we've been talking about it for close to 10 years. And they are so different from each other and linked to one another that I think it will forever be debatable. Now, I'm a fan of all three, right? Kendrick, Drake, and J. Cole, but all three for very different reasons. And I love the fact that they are all three very different artists, right? Drake, we know what he does. He kind of does everything. 1 minute he's going to spit and give you something dope. Next minute he's going to sing. He's going to do some trap joints. He's going to, take somebody's style. That's what he do. But I always like it because I feel like that's Drake's lane. He owns that lane. Kendrick Lamar, you know what I'm saying? He's more on the conscious side, and he's more on the loose cannon side as far as his delivery and what he's going to make. He's probably the most artistic out of the three artists. And J. Cole is kind of always, to some people, felt like the third wheel, but I think in recent years, he's kind of pulled himself back up to equivalency. That's a word, right? Next to Drake and Kendrick, based off his hustle, based off his bars, and the music he's put together in recent years, and Dreamville. I think it's dope to watch all three of them do what they do. Maybe I just did the bonus episode. But nevertheless, I don't really agree with Royce the 5'9". I don't think that separates him. Sure, Kendrick is probably the one out of the crew who doesn't have his own label. Well, he has something now. But as far as established with artists and stuff like that, and the other two kind of did, right? But Kendrick as an artist is hands down the most consistent out of the two, because the other two can't really lay fame to having no whack albums. Kendrick doesn't have no whack, no subpar projects. And maybe that's why he doesn't really have a label, right? He ain't got no time to focus. He write music over here. So, and he has a Pulitzer Prize. So whatever, surprise. A Pulitzer Prize. Or surprise, right? Who thought that would happen? But nevertheless, Royce, we don't really believe you. You need more people, like Slaughterhouse people, something like that. That's another album I need to check out. Also, in other news, there's a couple of things brewing. The Chronic is now finally back with Death Row Records. And if you don't know, Snoop Dogg bought Death Row Records a while back, right before the Super Bowl, I think. Yeah, right before the Super Bowl. So that's a good thing? I guess so, right? I guess it is a good thing in a lot of ways. I think the only thing that made that announcement for somebody like me or you who were around during that time, me or you who owns the album, I mean, I had the cassette and I also had the digital. I know you're saying cassette or whatever. I never got rid of it. But I also have the digital version. The Chronic has never really left my life or my rotation. So an announcement like that is, for me, is not like, oh man, I've been so thirsty to hear the Chronic. I'm glad it's on Death Row Records and Snoop has it now and I could stream it finally. Nah, man, I've kind of always had it. I've always listened to it. One thing you'll learn about me if you are new to this podcast, I listen to a lot of new music and I still play a lot of old school music. I still play a lot of music I grew up on in the 90s, some of it from the 80s, and I'm talking about full-on albums, right? Like sometimes some things are just background noise. Sometimes I'm in the mood to hear some joints. Some of them are just nostalgia, right? Like Showbiz and AG, Runaway Slave. It was an album I bought back in the day on cassette. I didn't have a lot of money, so when you bought that album, if you liked it even a little bit, it got heavy rotation because you wasn't getting another one for the next 2 weeks or something. But I'll pop an album on like that. It's a little bit of nostalgia, it's a little bit I haven't heard in a while. So like when albums like this, they're like, yo, it's on streaming services and people get hyped. I start to think like, wow, am I the only one that still have all my music? Now, I had a podcast, a blog back in the day called hiphoppolitic.com. And I did this write-up. I wish I still kept it just for the archive. So, you guys who never even knew or seen it could go back and listen or read or watch some of these posts that I had. And I did one post in particular where I was debating on, and it was a nice write-up, I was debating on digitizing my library. At the time, I had all CDs, right? All my CDs. And some CDs I had sold over time, which I wish I hadn't done. But I had broke it down to my essential albums. And it was the albums I had. It was what I played in the car. It's what I rode with. And, around this time, iPods were out, phones were out, MP3 players and all of that. And I had dibbled and dabbled with, digitizing 1 or 2 albums. And I was like, yo, this is crazy because back in the day, when I used to walk to high school, which is one of those moments where I would really zone out into my music, before I would leave, I had to decide, what am I taking with me to listen to? Is it one album? Because I know I'm going to listen to it walking to school and then walking home. Was it 2 or 3? I never knew. And it was like I had to make a decision. But then when we got to the future and we got these smartphones, and I had an iPhone early. I had the iPhone, the first iPhone. And I just remember yo, I could just take all my CDs, put them in iTunes, and just have my whole music library on my phone. So my selection or my choice wouldn't be, exclusive to whatever CD I brought with me. I could listen to whatever. It was just that feeling of having my music and being able to take it where I wanted that made it dope. And I still do that to this day. So long story short, I digitized everything, so all my music is digital on my laptop, in the cloud, on a hard drive. So when the Chronic comes to streaming, everybody's excited. Or this album is on streaming now. This Lil Wayne mixtape is now on streaming. I'm like, but don't we all have access to that anyway? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. And I spent way too much time on that. But you get my point. At least the Chronic is back on death row. So whenever they choose to, promote the catalog and do the NFT thing and all of that, you don't have to look at the catalog and say, now how they not going to have the Chronic up there? Because they will. Now you got to work on a deep cover soundtrack, because I swear you cannot find that album unless you own it on hard copy. And lastly, so if you've been paying attention, there's been a little back and forth between two rappers who have collaborated with one another on some very dope records. Two of my favorites, Benny the Butcher and Freddie Gibbs. Now, Freddie Gibbs is always into something. Benny the Butcher, not so much. Benny the Butcher put out an album, Tana Talk 4. It is in my heavy rotation, hands down. It has already earned a spot in my top 5 of the year because I can't stop playing it. It's just that simple. Freddie Gibbs has an album coming out, and so far I believe he's released 3 tracks, right? 2 solo joints and 1 with Pusha T, and I haven't disliked one yet. Now, both of these cats, and I'm putting up air quotes, are supposedly beefing. And, Freddie Gibbs saying he got bars for Benny. Honestly, I think they trolling, and I think this is a marketing scheme to draw attention to one another. Because Benny the Butcher just does him. He doesn't typically get into back and forths, and that's what seems odd. Freddie Gibbs is always into something, so you won't know if it's real or not. But it seems really odd to have Benny and them talking. I think it's literally a competition that won't really yield any real diss tracks, maybe a couple bars here and there, but won't really yield any real diss tracks, any real beef, any real standby, I want to hear what they got to say joints. So it's kind of corny, and it's taken away from my experience with Benny the Butcher's album and my anticipation of Freddie Gibbs' album, because I don't feel like it's necessary for these two. Whether it be real or fake, it's just not necessary. But, as a hip-hop fan, if it were ever real, I would be standing by to hear diss tracks from them both, because I don't think it's an easy win for either one of them. Benny the Butcher is seriously dope with the bars. You can't even see him losing. But Freddie Gibbs, his ability to change flows and incorporate humor and bars, it would be interesting. I'm just saying it would be interesting, and I wouldn't mind seeing it. But let's just keep it to the music if it ain't real, because all of this Twitter finger stuff. Come on now. What do you think about this quote unquote beef between Benny the Butcher and Freddie Gibbs? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Please know that this podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. All you have to do is go to your favorite podcasting app, click in the search bar, type in the words Hip Hop Now Podcast, hit subscribe, and stay locked into weekly hip hop content. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Vegas World INC. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic, I'm a fan. Peace.
Drop it on the random.